Why is murder evil? Why is murder evil? Murder is evil because it is one person taking the life of another person without even a hint of a just cause. That's what murder means. We're not in this sermon talking about killing or talking about, is it okay to go to war or is it okay to defend yourself? We're not talking about any of that. We can talk about that later, and I would love to. What we're talking about is murder. One person killing another person or multiple people when they have no just cause to do so. It's just they're killing them. That's murder. That's what the Bible means when it speaks of murder. So what does God say about murder? Why is murder evil? Genesis 9, 6, and 7. A few chapters later than what we read in Genesis 1. Genesis 9, 6, and 7. Right after Noah, God says, "And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning." He's talking to Noah and his sons. "And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man." Listen to this. "Whoever sheds the blood of man," meaning whoever murders another person, "by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." So there's a lot going on here, but the gist of it, what we can take away from this is murder. First of all, God says murder is evil because you're killing someone who's created in the image of God. This precious creation of God, the pinnacle of creation, His pinnacle of the creation. God says, do not kill, do not murder another person. And the reason is, He says, because man is made in the image of God. That's what God says. That's why it's evil. What does Jesus say about murder? I mean, what does God say about murder? Anybody ever heard of the 10 Commandments? It's pretty well known, okay? Exodus 20:13, it's one of the 10 Commandments. It made the top 10 list. There's like 600 commandments in the Old Testament, and then God summarizes them on Mount Sinai by giving the 10 commandments from which all the other commandments flow. This one made the list. You shall not murder. In the Hebrew, it's just 2 words. It's no murder. That's what God says about it. And some people go, yeah, that's what the God of the Old Testament says. But what does Jesus say about it? The God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, He's mad, He's showing divine wrath, and He could kill people, and like all this stuff. But Jesus is nice, and Jesus is loving, and Jesus is different, and Jesus changed things, and Jesus is different than God. That's not true. Jesus is God. Jesus has eternally existed. The God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament. Jesus, God the Son, has been with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit for all eternity. But just so you don't go, well, what did Jesus say about that? Was Jesus really that harsh against murder? Yeah, He was. Actually, in Matthew 19, 18, and 19, He's asked to summarize the commandments. Which commandments should we actually obey? And He starts talking to a Jewish lawyer, and He said this, "You shall not murder." Matthew 19, 18, and 19. "You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness." That means lie. "Honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus perfectly upheld that we should not murder. It's evil because man's created in the image of God. What does Paul say about murder? See, some people like, God in the Old Testament said stuff, then Jesus changed stuff, and then Paul changed stuff, and they're all three saying different things. They have different views, and so it's not true. The whole Bible is communicating the same message. Jesus just came and fulfilled the law, so now we no longer have to obey it to find our justification and righteousness. Jesus didn't change anything. He accomplished everything. He fulfilled the law. He didn't get rid of it. He fulfilled it. So what did Jesus say? We saw that. What did Paul say? Paul in Romans 13, 9 and 10 is summarizing the commandments. Again, what God says we should do. God's royal decree of how His people, how His creations, humankind, how we should live. Paul says, "For the commandments, You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not covet. And any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Well, Paul's upholding, saying, yes, the commandments are still true. They're still good. You shouldn't murder. And he also says all the commandments of God are really fulfilled in this word. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you're loving your neighbor, you're not going to murder your neighbor. If you're serving your neighbor, you're not going to murder them. If you're loving them, you're going to forgive them even if they wrong you, and you're not going to murder. If they inconvenience you, you're not going to murder them to get rid of the inconvenience because you want to love them. Love is the fulfillment of the law. Murder is evil because it is in opposition to the very fabric of the created order. Say that again. Murder is evil because it is in opposition to the very fabric of the created order. It's the antithesis to how God has created us to live. The law, how God has commanded us to live, how He's telling, this is how I've wired you. This is how the fabric of the created order goes together. You're supposed to love. The law is fulfilled in love. So murder would be the antithesis to that, because murder would be the opposite of loving someone. You'd be killing them. That's why murder is evil. And friends, we know murder's evil. Your God-given conscience bears witness to the fact that murder is evil, and so does mine. Let me give you an example. Adam Lanza, in 2012, walked into a school in Connecticut, an elementary school. He was wearing black, he was wearing military clothing, and he was heavily armed. Adam Lanza walked into this school and systematically killed 26 people. 20 of them were children. 6 of them were adults. Do you remember this happening just a little over 2 years ago? December of 2012, Adam Lanza goes in, starts mowing people down with automatic weapons. 20 children, 6 adults. Our entire nation was ticked off. There was a fire lit within us saying, we have got to do a better job at protecting our children. We have got to do a better job at making sure lunatics can't get automatic weapons, can't get weapons of any kind if they're out of their mind, and go and slaughter people. You don't mess with our children. You don't mess with going to a school and shooting people. Do you remember how ticked off you were when that happened? I remember how ticked off I was. And we know deep down, this is wrong. The whole nation was weeping because of what he did. And rightly so. Do you remember September 11th, 2001? Do you remember what happened? Do you remember where you were that morning? When the terrorists hijacked planes and flew them into the World Trade Center, flew them into the Pentagon? Do you remember what you were feeling and what you were thinking as you saw those buildings collapse and all of those people murdered? I remember what I was thinking. I was a lot younger. I just remember thinking, how can this happen? This is terrible. It shouldn't be like this. That launched us into a war that we're still fighting today. It's safe to say that 9/11 ticked a lot of us off and helped us realize murder's wrong. I don't care if you disagree with someone or anything. Murder's wrong. What about the Holocaust? Ever think back to that? When Hitler led Nazi Germany to murder millions of people because they didn't fit into his category of what a human being should be or what an ultimate race should be. He saw them as dirty and as filthy, as less than human, and he led a charge that murdered millions. I don't think we'll ever forget the Holocaust as long as this world continues. We'll never forget it, because it's a horrific event where millions were murdered. The whole world had to get involved to stop it. We know murder's wrong. That's why we get enraged when these kind of things happen. We know it's evil. It's the unauthorized, intentional killing of a human being who has intrinsic worth. They're created in the image of God. That's why it's evil.